Welcome to Science with Dr. T. This week, we'll be learning about pedigrees. Pedigrees are visual representations of family relationships used to track the inheritance of traits or diseases across generations. They help us understand how genes are passed down and determine the mode of inheritance. Squares represent males, circles represent females, shaded shapes represent affected individuals. Those are those that are expressing the trait. And unshaded shapes are individuals who don't express that trait. Lines connect individuals to show parent-offspring and sibling relationship. In this pedigree, you can see that everyone who is affected is homologous recessive, which lets us know that this trait is recessive. Because remember, for a recessive trait to be expressed, the person has to have two recessive alleles. So what are the different modes of inheritance? Modes of inheritance can be recessive or dominant, and autosomal or sex-linked. Autosomal means the gene is on one of the 22 autosome chromosomes. Sex-linked means the gene is on one of the sex chromosomes, most likely the X chromosome. So you will also see sex-linked as X-linked inheritance. Autosomal recessive inherited traits can only be expressed if the person inherits both recessive alleles, one from each parent. Otherwise, if they only have one recessive allele, they are carriers. This means they carry the trait, but they don't express it. The main features of autosomal recessive inheritance include males and females are affected in roughly equal proportions, and affected individuals are usually siblings in one generation. Autosomal dominant inheritance only requires a person to have one of the dominant alleles to express the trait. The main features of autosomal dominant inheritance include males and females are affected in roughly equal proportions. Individuals in more than one generation are affected if the condition is inherited. And affected males and females are both able to pass the condition to their sons and daughters. X-linked dominant inheritance means the dominant trait is carried on the X chromosome. So only one X chromosome has to carry the allele for the person to be affected. The main features of X-linked dominant inheritance include affected fathers pass the trait to all daughters. Affected males cannot pass the condition to their sons. Equal probability in males and females being affected. In X-linked recessive inheritance, females must have the allele on both X chromosomes to be affected. Otherwise, they'll just be carriers. Since males only have one X chromosome, they will be affected if they have the recessive allele. The main features of X-linked recessive inheritance include affected males cannot pass the condition to their sons. Males are affected almost exclusively, and the variant can be passed from unaffected female carriers to their sons. Now let's put these concepts into practice. What mode of inheritance is depicted in this pedigree? Let's examine the pedigree. We see that neither parent here is affected since they are not shaded in, but they have a child who is affected. So this means the parents are carriers and the trait is recessive. Now we need to figure out if it's autosomal or X-linked. Well, everyone who is affected is a male. As we talked about in the previous slide, X-linked recessive inheritance is almost exclusively male. So the mode of inheritance here is X-linked recessive. Let's try another problem. What mode of inheritance is depicted in this pedigree? What is the genotype of 2-3? Let's examine the pedigree. We see that neither parent here is affected since they are not shaded in, but they have a child who is affected. So this means the parents are carriers and the trait is recessive. Now we need to figure out if it's autosomal or X-linked. Both a male and female child are affected. Since this trait is recessive, we know two alleles are required for it to be expressed. For offspring, they would need to inherit one allele from each parent, right? Well, if it was X-linked, then this female offspring would have the recessive allele on both X chromosomes, meaning she would have to inherit the trait on the X chromosome from her mom and her dad. Since mom is unaffected, she would have one recessive allele and one dominant allele. Since men only have one X chromosome, then the father would have to have the recessive allele on his X chromosome, which means he would be affected as well for this to be X-linked. Since the father is unaffected, we know this is autosomal. And for the second part of the question, what is the genotype of 2-3? This is the dad who is unaffected. And since he has a child who is affected, then we know he is a carrier. Because remember, the affected child has to inherit one recessive allele from each parent. So dad being a carrier means he would have one dominant allele and one recessive allele. I hope this has been helpful. Make sure to practice on your own with a few different pedigrees until you get the hang of it. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to like our videos, subscribe to the channel, and share. Next time, we'll look at membranes and membrane transport.